Shalom, children. We have been learning about clean and unclean things, and there are so many rules about it to learn. Of course, the priests were in charge of making sure people knew the rules, and they also had jobs to do that had them traveling and working day and night. It was a good thing Yahweh chose the whole tribe of Levi to take care of all the priestly duties. Now, we have already said that being unclean doesn't really mean you were dirty or that you had done something bad and had to ask for forgiveness. It was just a way for Yahweh to make a difference between the things that were set apart for him and those things that were not. Clean things simply have a different purpose from unclean things. Like the animals we can eat and the ones we cannot. And remember, if you become unclean, you didn't stay that way forever. Today, we are going to hear more about the things that made people unclean. Now, many of you may have a little brother or sister. Or you may have seen a lady with a big belly who was carrying a baby. Well, having a baby is not a bad thing. We love to have new babies around. But for a mother who has just had a baby, Yahweh had rules about when she could come into the temple again. She could still worship Yahweh, but for many days after having the baby, the mother needed to rest and take care of the baby, and Yahweh wanted them to stay at home to do that. They could still sing praises to Yahweh and pray to him, but for several days they needed to do it from home and not at the temple. Now this was a great time for mothers to sing to their babies, so that when they were first brought to the temple, they wouldn't get scared with all the new noises.
Adon HaKavod, Melech HaMelachim, Shemesh Tzedakah u'Ma'abed b'chnafeah.
The first time the mother could go to the temple again, she brought some gifts for sacrifices to Yahweh. Do you remember that we talked about sacrifices before? Well, Yahweh knew that some people had more wealth than others, and he said that those who had a lot had to bring a 1-year-old lamb and a pigeon or turtle dove. But if they weren't wealthy enough to have lambs, they could just bring 2 turtle doves or pigeons. Another rule Yahweh had was all about when a person developed bumps on their body. These were not any old bumps like you might have from a bug bite, and they were not like chickenpox bumps that you may catch from someone else who has it. They were more like when the Mitzrites got boils all over their bodies. These were bumps that Yahweh put there, so they were no accident. We call these bumps Zarat. Yahweh may have put the bumps there to get someone's attention, or it might have been simply a bug bite. Just to be safe, they had to go to the priest and let him check the bump to make sure it was okay. And there were rules the priest had to be careful to follow. They couldn't just look at someone's bump and make a decision straight away. No, they had to inspect it for color, texture, and even watch to see if one bump turned into more bumps. The doctor may do the same thing if you get sick and your mother and father ask him to check to see if you're getting better or not. In Israel, the person would sometimes have to go into a room and not come out for a whole week. Sometimes he had to do this twice. You may think that that would be boring, but no matter what, you had to do exactly what the priest said. Sometimes the person would hear the priest say, "You are clean, go home." But other times they didn't get such good news. If they were told it was Zarat, they had to leave their house and go and live outside of the area where everyone else lived. They had to cover their mouth, tear their clothes, and yell, "Unclean, unclean," if anyone came near. Now, another thing that could happen is that a person may become bald-headed. Of course, being bald is not a sin, or a sign that someone had done something bad. In fact, there are many men walking around who are bald-headed and are just fine. But if a person got an infection on his head or forehead, then the priest had to check it to make sure it was not Zarat. Like the other people with Zarat, he too had to go away and live far from everyone else. The same thing happened if there was an infection that got onto their hair or their beards. But if they were okay after the priest checked twice, the person only had to wash their clothes, and then they could go home. Now, people were not the only thing that could get Zarat. Clothes and houses could get it too. Let's learn about clothing first. Wool, linen, and leather could get Zarat. If a person saw that there were green or red spots on the garment, or on something made of leather, like maybe their shoes or their belts, they had to take it to the priest to check it. But before the priest could say it was okay or not, he had to lock up the item for a week. Afterwards, if there were more spots, it was Zarat. But if not, they had to wash it and then wait another week, so the priest could check it again. If it stayed clean, then it was just a dirty garment that apparently needed extra washing. Maybe it was just someone had spilled some juice on it and didn't want anyone to know. But if the garment showed new spots or didn't look any better, then the priest would say it was unclean and they had to burn it. Oh dear, I hope it wasn't someone's favorite tunic. Now, let's hear about the rules for houses. Obviously, they couldn't bring the house to the priest, so the priest would have to travel to the house in order to check it. If there were green or red spots on the bricks in the houses, and the bricks were all dented, then the priest would have to take out the bricks and throw them far away into a place outside of where everyone lived. They would have to put new bricks where the old ones were, take all the furniture and belongings out of the house, and close up the house. After several days, the priest would come back to see if the new bricks were okay. Meanwhile, the family would have to go and sleep somewhere else. Now, that may have seemed like fun, getting to spend a week away from home. But for the adults, that was a lot of work. What's more, maybe they had to spend money to stay in a lodge until the priest said they could go home. And worst of all, if the new bricks had become infected, the whole house had to come down. That's right, every brick had to be knocked out. Down came the doors and the windows, and it all had to be carried to a place far from where the people lived. That family now had to build a new house. And if anyone had slept in the old house, they were unclean until that evening. The people who had been unclean had to wait until they were clean again in Yahweh's eyes before they could bring sacrifices to the temple once more. There were a lot of rules that the priest and the people had to follow to make sure they became clean in Yahweh's eyes. But it was Yahweh's way of protecting the people and teaching them to always be careful and to trust the priest to help them through a rough situation. Yahweh always looks out for his people, even when we don't know we are doing something wrong, doesn't he? Well, children, we have come to the end of our story for today. So we will see you next time for another exciting Torah portion. Shalom.
And they will know that we belong to Him when